All right, this is section 4.2 in our Math Links textbook, grade 8. We're working on conversion of fractions to decimals to percents. We started at question 4 in the book where it says convert each fraction to a decimal and a percent. So for the first one, A, we have 1/250th. Now if we were to draw that, obviously we would draw a square like this and we would put 250 squares in here, and this is not 250 squares, but since you're not actually going to be counting, we'll just pretend that this is 250 squares. So that is one unit made up of 250 squares, and if we were to say 1/250th, we would shade 1 of the 250th, and we know that since 1 out of 100 is 1%, we know from our experience that this has to be less than 1% of that tank full. 1/250th has to be less. So there's two ways we can convert that to first a decimal. And the first way is the easiest. You take the 1, the numerator, and you divide it by the denominator. And that will work for all fractions. If you take the numerator and divide it by the denominator, you will always convert it into a decimal. Oop, that's not the right number. Equals 0.04. So 0.004 is our answer as a decimal. The other way we could have done it, what is the other way? Anybody? Yeah, but what is that called? What are we making when we do that? What are we doing when we multiply both the numerator and denominator? We're making an equivalent fraction. So for this one, remember, if I multiplied it by 1, would that change the value of that fraction? No. And there are many ways we could represent 1. One of them being, of course, 4/4, right? And if I was to multiply that fraction by 4/4, since it is the number 1, you would all agree whatever my product is for that, it's going to be the same value, right? So when we do that, because we learned how to multiply by fractions, we would know we would multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators, and the equivalent fraction would be 4/1000ths, right, if we multiply that by 1. And of course, 4/1000ths, written as a decimal, is 0.004. So now we've converted it both to a decimal through division and converted it to a decimal through equivalent fractions. Once we get to a percentage, we're going to take our fraction of 4/1000, and if we're going to convert it to a percent, what kind of fraction, Chloe, what's the denominator of a fraction that's a percent? What is always the denominator of a fraction that's a percent? 100. So if we can convert that to an equivalent fraction, where the denominator is 100, then we will know the percent, because the numerator will be the percentage. And Jack, what do we divide 1,000 by to get 100? We divide it by 10. And remember, division like this is really dividing by 1, really, because dividing by 10/10 is still dividing by 1, which doesn't change it. So an equivalent fraction to this would be 0.4/100, which therefore is 0.4%, which is less than 1%, which we knew from our first picture. What's another way I could represent that? I could represent it as 0.4%. Which confuses people because guess what they see when they see that? Guess what people think that is? They think that's 40%, but it's not. It's 0.4%. Or if you reduce it to lowest terms, it would be 0.4 as in lowest terms. It's 2/5. It's 2/5%. So just digest that for a second. Make sure you understand that all of those are the same thing. If you go back to my original picture, which I will in just a second. So going back in time to our original picture, this makes sense. That this right here is 0.4%, right? Or less than 0.5%, because there's 250 squares, and I've only shaded in one of the 250, so it's less than 1%. Question 2 says 81/200. So the easiest way to convert it to a decimal would be to do what, Cohen? 81 divided by 200, that's right. 81, oh, sorry. I know what you said, but you said the wrong thing. 81 divided by 200 would be the easiest way. 81 divided by 200 is 0.405 as a decimal. The more difficult way is the equivalent fraction way, and this is what Cohen said. Cohen said if you wanted to change that to a fraction or to an equivalent fraction that you could read and write, he said divide by 2. Unfortunately for Cohen, he is right for part of it and wrong for part of it. What does that fraction? That fraction has a decimal in the numerator, which is a no-no. So I can't read 40.5 hundredths and then write it as a decimal because that, to me, does not say 40.5 hundredths. It is 40.5 hundredths, but I have no idea what that looks like. The good news is, what does that tell me, though? That mistake of his. It does tell me what? It does tell me the percent, doesn't it? So he inadvertently figured out what the percent was. So dividing by 2, unfortunately for him, is not the easiest way to convert that to a decimal. Andy, what would you do? You're right. You could have done that. Let's go back to that. Then she said, after this, I could multiply it by 10. And then you get 405 over 1,000. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And you could do it from there. What would have been an easier first step, though, Andy? Instead of dividing by 2. Multiply by what? Multiply by 5. So the correct answer for what you should have done to convert that to a decimal is not divide by 2. Multiply by 5. Because as long as that denominator is a 10, 100, or 1,000, or 10,000, or 100,000, or a million, a base 10 number, as long as it's a base 10 number with no decimal in the numerator, you should be able to read it and write it. So that says 405 thousandths, and that decimal that we got from the calculator also says 405 thousandths. So we're able to convert that like that. And again, if I started here and I want to get the percent, just like Chloe said, all percentages are out of 100. Divide by 10. And you have 40.5 out of 100, which is 40.5%. Is there another way I could have written that answer as a percent? Yes. I could have written it as 40.5%. And our last one, 7/5. If I go the easy way to convert it to a decimal, 7 divided by 5, it should be 1.4, I think, isn't it? Is my mind working properly? Yes, it is. 1.4 is a decimal. And if I convert it to a fraction, what will I multiply both numerator and denominator by? Danny? Say it again. If you multiply it by 100, this is an interesting one. Try again. No, okay, Danny's. Still Danny's. By 20. Does everyone agree with Danny? 20 is the best number to multiply by. Everyone agrees. Okay. All right. What about 2? Why 2? Is that wrong? Not really. Why is 20 not a bad one either? Why is 20 actually technically a better one? Kind of. It's what I know right away. I know the percentage. I know my answer over here is going to be 140% because it's now a fraction out of 100. But if I go back to this one, what number is that as a decimal? What's 14/10? What kind of fraction is that? It's improper. And I can't change an improper fraction to a decimal. But I can change a mixed fraction. What is that as a mixed fraction? 1 4/10. What number is this up here? It's 1 4/10. So a mental note for yourselves, if you're using equivalent fractions to change to a decimal, and your fraction is an improper fraction, you have to use mixed fractions to read it properly to write it as a decimal. I don't know what this to me does not look like 14/10. If I say that's 14/10, it is 14/10, but it makes no sense because I got a 1 and I got 4/10, and then my brain doesn't function that way. But when I convert it to a mixed fraction, 1 4/10, now I read it just 1 4/10, and it makes sense that is our answer. Do I have a percentage up there yet? Anything I can use for a percentage? No, I did, but do I have it right now? No. So I'm going to take this one and make it into an equivalent fraction, like Chloe said, out of 100, which will be 140 over 100, which therefore, 7 out of 5. If you get 7 out of 5 on a test, you got everything right, all 5 questions right, you got the 2 bonus questions right, you ended up with 140% on your test. If we were to draw it, the denominator of a fraction tells you how many parts in total there are. So in this case, this is 5/5, and then I need to draw another whole shape. Excuse me. Shade those in, 2 of them. That's 2/5. And if I add those together, Altogether, I would have 7/5. So that's the picture that represents 7/5.